Hello, my friends. So what we have here is a salvage engine, and I've actually got a couple of these that I'm going to be doing. This incidentally is not for the car behind me. This is from a Toyota Corolla, a 91 Toyota Corolla. These are very popular engines in the 90s in all of the economy cars. This is a 4AFE, so a good chance a lot of you guys may have this engine and may have to replace the engine in your car if you're trying to keep it. So I've got a couple of rebuild videos coming up. One of them is going to be kind of a more in-depth rebuild where I'm going to do bearings and re-ring and take all the measurements and see that everything's in spec and all that. That's not what we're going to do in this video. This video is not exactly something I condone, but what we're going to do is just simply check this engine to see that it's not going to have any major problems. It's not going to have an engine knock. It's not going to have a blown head gasket. We're not going to do anything to the engine. Again, that's not really my preference. Not that I'm saying you should get a new engine. I wouldn't say you should do that necessarily, but you need to look at your financial situation, make a decision what you want to do if you have a blown engine, and you need to look at your options for replacement. This particular customer, he only has like a $400 budget, including the engine. So in this application, I can be very sympathetic with that. I just want to do the best I can to make sure that we've got a good engine here. And I know that some of you guys, especially if you're in similar financial situations, you don't have a choice but to get a salvaged engine. You're not going to be able to take it to a machine shop and all that. So I'm going to give you some tips on at least what I do to make sure that the engine that I pulled is a good one. And that's going to be the point of the video. This is going to be for you guys that just need to get by. So hopefully this will help you. This engine I already know is good. And that's because I did kind of the ultimate engine salvage technique to find if you've got a good engine or not. And that is, I got this engine from a running vehicle. This was from a private owner. The transmission in the vehicle completely went out. I was able to do a compression test. I was able to run the engine for some time, so I know this engine's pretty good. Generally, when you go to your pick and pulls or you pull and pays or your self-service yards, you're not even going to be able to start the car. Even if you could, they wouldn't let you bring a battery in or things like that. So you're very limited in what you can do to assess the health of an engine. And I'm going to show you some things that I do in that situation. But obviously your first thing is, if you can run the car, I've got a used car check validation video that will show you some tricks to see if the engine's good on a running used car. You can refer to that, but most of this is going to apply to that typical thing that you walk up to a car in the salvage yard and you've just got to guess if the engine's good or not. We're going to take away some of the guesswork. So one of the things I like to do is check for evidence that the engine has every reason to be good to begin with. I like cars that have some severe damage on them, indicating that maybe they were driving if the car is in perfect condition, then I'm a little bit more wary that either the engine or transmission is bad. Could just be the transmission. Maybe the engine's perfect, like the car I pulled this out of. But what I'll do is often look in the glove box of the car, check for any kind of maintenance records, service records, something that indicates that the engine was blown and they declined the repair, that kind of thing. So I think a lot of people have the impression that rollover cars are the ultimate because the car had to have been driving. It couldn't have been struck when it was parked or something. And that's true, but you got to remember the rollover car has to end on the wheels instead of on the hood of the car or the roof of the car, because if the car is upside down, there's a risk that the engine ran a long time without oil and may not be good. So those are some common sense things to look for in just the vehicle itself. But then the other thing that I'll do is I'll look over the engine and I'll look for any evidence of big orange stains or spills. This might indicate that it overheated and spilled coolant out of it, so I look for things like that. Other things, like we're in that used engine video, I look under the engine oil cap for any foam, things like that. But the first thing that I like to do on a salvage engine, I like to go right for the oil. So let's go ahead and do that and check the oil on this engine and see if we've got any red flags right off the bat. All right, my high-tech engine oil analyzer. This is the lid from a pickle jar. and it's got this white, really nice white reflective background on it that I'm going to clean up a little bit. And all I need is just, I've already drained the oil from this vehicle before I pulled the engine out anyway, but all I need is just a little trickle of oil, just enough to cover the bottom of this pickle jar lid, and that's all I'm looking to do. All right, what I'm going to do is hold the oil under a really bright light. Sunlight works great for this. And I'm looking for any metal particles or any what I call Tinkerbell dust. And you can see this oil's pretty dirty, which, as I've mentioned before, I like that. I like the dirty oil because it means that some parts changer didn't try to fix an engine knock or something by changing the oil. This oil's been in this vehicle for a while, and that indicates that if there was a problem, it would have shown up by now with this oil being this dirty. But that looks great. That is a really good sign. Let me show you something that's not a good sign so you know what you're looking for. Now let's look at this sample, and hopefully you can see, but there is a lot of glitter in this oil sample. Notice also the oil looks a lot cleaner. It's a lot newer oil, but this engine definitely has a problem. Hopefully that'll show up in the camera. But you can just see tons of what looks like glitter in there, and that is going to indicate that this engine either needs a rebuild or is very soon to need one. This is not an engine you just want to plug and play. So anytime I do an oil change, I always do this pickle jar lid test, just to make sure that there isn't an early indication of any kind of problem. So we're not going to use that engine for sure. This, even though the oil is much darker, this is definitely the engine we want to go with. Now that's a good pickle. All right, so far on the oil test, we're looking pretty good. So obviously at a salvage yard, you're not going to be able to get a whole bunch of oil because the law requires them to change the fluids out and stuff. But you'll be able to get enough to dribble out of the oil pan that you can do that test. Now, the next thing that I really like doing, I love compression tests. I always believe in compression tests, but you can't do a compression test in the field. I do the next best thing, though. Obviously, when you get the engine to your garage, you can do a leak down test, which I will do eventually, and I do mine a little differently, probably, so you might want to watch that. But I'm going to do what I call a hand crank compression test. And the idea is, yeah, we're not going to be able to do a true compression test and get 150 psi on this. But if I turn the engine over by hand really fast and try to get as much compression as I can, and I get a minimum amount of compression that I find acceptable, and it's the same between the cylinders, again, that's indication the engine may run well. There is no way you can ever have 100% validation on an engine at a salvage yard that it's going to run well, but this is going to be more evidence towards that. So let's go ahead and try it. So first we get all the spark plugs out of the engine, and I'm going to feed my compression tester in. I always like to put a little anti-seize on, particularly these 4AFEs have this annoying thing where sometimes they like to grab onto the compression test end and not let go of it. So there we go. And then I'm going to crank over the engine as fast as I can. Of course, typically the engine would be in a car, so maybe a little easier said than done in that case, but just do the best we can. All right, now I realize the gauge is upside down. Sorry about that. But what I'm going to do is try to turn this over as quick as I can. Again, I'm not trying to reach 150 psi on this thing. I'm looking to make sure, A, that there is compression. If I get 60 psi of compression, then I will be satisfied that the cylinder is in reasonably good shape if I do that with a hand crank. And also, I'm going to look that the compression is even, whatever it ends up being, across all the cylinders. So that's the idea here. Let's see how it works. There's the compression, so I want to try to zip right through it. And I already like that. Let's try it one more time. There's the compression. All right, well, that's actually pretty good. So I'm going to try to achieve almost 90 psi on the other 3 cylinders, and if I do, I'm going to be satisfied that the engine passes a compression test. Again, if this were the compression with a starter hooked up to the engine, forget it, this engine's terrible. And this next reading here, that's just fine. Again, with hand cranking, not nearly as accurate, but I'm convinced that there is plenty of compression in each cylinder, and it is equivalent in the cylinders, at least as best I can do. And the other thing is, while cranking it over, it felt really good. There was no binding. I didn't hear any unusual noises, no evidence of knocking or anything like that. So killed a number of birds with one stone here, but that is the best you could do with a pick and pull compression test. All right, so I'm pretty sure somebody's been in here before because it seems like there was a lot of gasket material. But let's get this oil pan off past the pickup. There we go. And the first thing I do is I look right here at the pickup tube, and you can see there's a couple of boogers in there, and it's soft stuff. It's nothing that I'm worried about. What I'm looking for is any big pieces of metal stuck in there, which also are going to show up in the bottom of the pan. The bottom of the pan looks really nice and clean. There's no big metal or shavings or glitter or any of that kind of stuff in there. So this is very good. But what I'm really looking to do here is I want to feel the movement of these rod bearings, and there is a clearance for these, but what I want to do is just a manual check of rocking these back and forth and up and down and see if any of them move really easily. A little bit of movement like that, if you can see it, a little bit is acceptable. Let's zoom in on that. Okay, so you can see that little bit of movement there. Granted, this is something that with a little experience you kind of get a touch for, but this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to feel in on all these. Sometimes you've got to turn the crank over in order to get to the other ones. I could probably do that manually since I took the spark plugs out earlier. And that'll bring my other ones up where I can get to them. And that feels good. And that feels good. And that other one I should have checked earlier, but that feels right. So at this point, I'm pretty safely convinced that the bottom end of the engine is in fairly good shape. Obviously, we could also take out the bearings and check them. That's something I typically do in the garage. I don't want to do that when I'm under a vehicle. Now, I'm going to do another thing here, and actually it usually makes more sense to do this before the oil pan, but I'm kind of getting ahead of myself because I already know we have a good engine here. But what we're going to do is take off this valve cover, and since this is an overhead cam, we're going to be able to get a good look at the camshaft. Actually, I think this one's a dual overhead cam, if I remember. All right. And again, looking for any of the obvious stuff that I may not have mentioned before, but like foam up here indicating coolant mixed with the oil. We obviously would have seen that also with our little oil analysis test earlier. But let's take a look at these cam lobes. All right, and these look great. What I'm looking for is any pitting or any severe scratching on the cam lobes, and these look really good. I'm also going to turn the engine over and check to make sure that the valves are all being pushed down, and I can see all the lifters are moving, and I already knew that that would be the case because of my compression test earlier. Had any of the valves been stuck open or something, I would have not have had compression in that cylinder, but they're all moving. I guess it's possible they could have been closed, stuck closed, but I can see all of the lifters are moving, so I know all of the valves are moving, and all of these lobes look in really good shape. So that settles it at this point. There is no question. If I was doing all of this at the salvage yard, I would settle that the odds are very good this is a good engine. Again, it's no guarantee, but the odds are strongly in my favor. I haven't found one thing that would indicate to me that this engine is going to be a problem. So at this point, I would load it up into a truck and bring it over to my garage, and I'll show you what we do next.